Hello, Americans. It's May 5th, 2020. This is Chad On Demand. Tonight, broadcasting from the not-so-United States of America. An America divided, where trust in the government and in the media right now are at an all-time low. Biases run deep right now.
The president said when he announced that those ships would be put into action against the COVID-19 epidemic, he said one of those ships would be operational in New York Harbor by next week. That's nonsense. It will not be there next week.
The Comfort has arrived in New York and is now making its way up the river.
The most egregious kinds of reporting errors are becoming more common. Formerly well-respected news organizations and experienced national reporters are making the sorts of mistakes that wouldn't be tolerated in journalism school.
What's working in terms of risk communication? What's scaring people in terms of misinformation? We need a vaccine against misinformation.
We've all got to be very responsible, and the media has a very important role in this, particularly the social media and electronic media of all types.
An America where misinformation and media bias is disgustingly rampant right now.
Misinformation and conspiracy theories about COVID-19 are rapidly spreading online.
Is the Wuhan coronavirus a biological weapon?
Around the world, journalists find themselves debunking wild claims.
You need to microwave your mail to kill the COVID-19 virus.
We are very poor at critical thinking. We are very poor at evaluating sources.
Fake Facebook pages run by fake accounts and or fake people.
An America where the numbers just don't add up.
Technically, even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death.
When I'm writing up my death report, I'm being pressured to add COVID. Why is that?
The intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
And tonight, a trip back in history and a look back at the last pandemic. And we'll hear what author John Barry has to say.
I'm John Barry, wrote a book, among others, called The Great Influenza, the story of the deadliest pandemic in history. I'm also on the faculty at the Tulane University School of Public Health.
And this nonsense with the media, in my opinion, has been the single biggest blow to the American people directly related to this pandemic, because it has divided us deeply, even more so than the 2016 election. I believe, and I warned of it in episodes 1, 2, and 3. The result of losing trust in the media and our government is that we now have lost trust in one another, which I believe will be the most devastating aftermath this country will have to endure for years to come. An America whose governors and mayors are making inconsistent decisions, creating confusion, anger, and even more panic. An America where protests are abound, and for good reason. But are we doing it smartly? Not so much. An America where sliding standards in different states with some infringing on our constitutional rights in many forms. In America, say in Michigan, you can't travel to your second home. You can't go to a friend's house or a neighbor's house. You can't buy vegetable or flower seeds, gardening supplies, clothes, or car seats, but you can buy lottery tickets, marijuana, and alcohol. In Mississippi, churchgoers adhering to social distancing guidelines by attending a drive-in worship service in their cars were issued $500 tickets by the police, as the local mayor claims the drive-in church service is a public health risk. In America where you can't take out your boat or your jet ski, but your canoe is okay. Where in some states you can buy beer, but not liquor. In America where up until yesterday you couldn't play golf, but trout season opened up early. In America where the WWE was deemed essential by the Florida governor, but the small business owner is not. In America where large corporate chains are receiving bailout money they shouldn't have, while some small businesses are still waiting on stimulus checks and are standing by watching their neighbors and friends who also own small businesses closing, not by the hundreds, by the thousands. And in America that still believes their media, which in my opinion has done the most damage of all, when we needed them the most. The bias has been clearly pointed out on both ends of the spectrum, where stories are just now being made up. From Fox to CNN, ABC, CBS, and NBC, they're all guilty. Then there's our trusted social media giants, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Where early last week, Facebook, who has teamed up with the WHO,
the World Health Organization, says it's working around the clock with internet and social media giants to combat widespread misinformation about the novel coronavirus outbreak.
It said they would start warning people who like or react to what their ideology deems to be fake news or misinformation. The problem with that is that the World Health Organization, one of whom the United States no longer funds, was the first one to start spreading false information. Look at the facts. On January 26th, they sent out a tweet, which is still up, by the way. Check it yourself. It reads, quote, "Preliminary investigation conducted by Chinese authorities have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the COVID virus identified in Wuhan, China." January 26th. I would say that's misinformation right there. Look it up for yourself. You probably even have the ability to retweet it, but please don't. So in February, the Director General of the WHO released several statements right after President Trump imposed a travel ban, calling on countries to not impose a travel ban. Don't do that. They did. They called on all the countries to say, don't impose a travel or trade warning. Such measures would increase fear and stigma among the international community. I would say that's misinformation. And even as recent as last week, the WHO sent out a statement saying that they stand by their recommendation not to wear masks unless you're sick. And now that turns out to be misinformation. So Facebook teams with an agency that we've defunded and are using their guidelines to censor information and police the internet is what they want you to hear.
Anything that would go against World Health Organization recommendations would be a violation of our policy.
If this doesn't bother you,
anything that would go against World Health Organization recommendations would...
then stop listening, because we're going to keep it real.
Social media giants, including Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, have all faced growing criticism about their role in the spread of misinformation.
And yet we share freely what we know not to be true, but sounds good. It's aligned with our belief system.
And we are seeing what the social media industry calls coordinated inauthentic activity. Now, the reason we call this coordinated inauthentic activity is that it involves botnets, which spread information automatically. This is automation. It also involves real people sitting behind fake accounts, meaning they are designed to look like American accounts. They often use VPNs so that the geotags say the United States. But these are people with a political agendas.
And if you're like me, you just feel like things aren't adding up right now. As more information comes out, I saw a video of how the COVID deaths were being counted, and I find this very troublesome. The popular YouTube video featuring a couple of California doctors was deleted off Facebook, was censored by YouTube, and made national headlines, and finally they put it back up. Now, could it be because they're right? Here's what they said.
What's interesting to me, too, is when someone dies in this country right now, they're not talking about the high blood pressure, the diabetes, the stroke. They say, did they die from COVID? We've been to hundreds of autopsies. You don't talk about one thing. You talk about comorbidities. Their vessels were narrowed. Their lungs were a smoker. COVID was part of it. It is not the reason they died, folks. It is one of many reasons. So to be so simplistic to say that's a COVID death because they have COVID, you know how many people die with pneumonia or people that die from with flu, I should say? It's not from flu. Their lungs were compromised by COPD. They had a heart attack 2 years ago. They have a weakened body. We aren't pressured to test for flu. But ER doctors now, my friends that I talk to say, it's interesting. When I'm writing up my death report, I'm being pressured to add COVID. Why is that? Why are we being pressured to add COVID to maybe increase the numbers and make it look a little bit worse than it is? I think so. So this is what I'm hearing from physicians I talked to in Wisconsin, New York, and everywhere.
So I wanted to find out a little bit more. And then I saw this from the public health director from Illinois.
I just want to be clear in terms of the definition of people dying of COVID. So the case definition is very simplistic. It means at the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. So that means that if you were in hospice and had already been given a few weeks to live, and then you also were found to have COVID, that would be counted as a COVID death. It means that even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. So everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death. I hope that's helpful.
And then the question was asked at a White House press briefing. And Dr. Deborah Birx, the White House Coronavirus Task Force Coordinator, said this.
So I think in this country, we've taken a very liberal approach to mortality. And I think the reporting here has been pretty straightforward over the last 5 to 6 weeks. There are other countries that if you had a pre-existing condition, and let's say the virus caused you to go to the ICU and then have a heart or kidney problem, some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. Right now, we're still recording it. The intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
And so from Ngozi Ezike, the Director of Public Health for the state of Illinois, to these doctors from California, to the White House Coronavirus Task Force Coordinator, way I understand it, if you have a heart attack and you go in and you just happen to have COVID, well, then it's a COVID death. Liver disease, the flu, anything. Why are they doing that? Do you think that's pretty significant information? And I can't help but think that why I'm not hearing this on the mainstream media. Does it not go along with the lines of the narrative to be in fear? In episode 1, I said we're looking at 100,000 deaths with social distancing guidelines, 200,000 without them. That was coming from all of the experts. And President Trump yesterday said probably 100,000. So we saved 100,000 lives by social distancing. So again, the 3 questions: how do we battle the disease while protecting the economy, while keeping society on some sort of an even keel? Because I'm not saying the disease isn't horrible. It is. And how do we move forward when it's hard to discern between what's a real threat and what is just simple panic and hysteria and misinformation? I say it's time to go gather your information. Gather both sides. Gather all of it. And then go with your gut. And that old saying, if history has taught us anything, we can get rid of that, because history doesn't seem to teach us a damn thing. We'll hear from one of the most respected authorities on that in author and historian John M. Barry. He wrote the book, the New York Times best-selling book, The Great Influenza.
I think the most important lesson was to tell the truth. People in authority have to tell the truth if they expect anybody listening to them to do what they're advised to do. That did not happen in 1918. As a result, there was real panic, literally in the streets, and society almost began to break down. In fact, the dean of the University of Michigan Medical School said if this continues for a few more weeks, civilization could easily disappear from the face of the earth. That's how bad it got.
The contradictory messages about the virus and the dishonesty motivating them is extremely dangerous right now. Refusing to tell people the truth will cost lives, because it undercuts our efforts to flatten the epidemic curve with practices like social distancing, which they depend upon us to do. And it erodes our trust in government. And that's a huge problem. The biggest lesson of the 1918 influenza epidemic, according to historian John M. Barry, is that leaders need to tell the truth no matter how hard it is to hear. If you Google 1918 pandemic, Wikipedia, the first paragraph says it all. To maintain morale, World War I censors minimized. World War I censors minimized early reports of illness and mortality in Germany, the United Kingdom, France, and the United States. Newspapers were free to report the epidemic's effects in neutral Spain. This gave rise to the name the Spanish flu. If a newspaper reported the truth, the government threatened it.
Also a law that made it punishable by 20 years in prison to, quote, utter, write, print, or publish any disloyal, scurrilous, profane, or abusive language about the government in the United States.